Community Viewpoint with John Pollock and Maria Hurst.
And welcome once again to Community Viewpoint. I'm John Pollock, your host once again for this segment and possibly a second segment. We have the honor of sitting next to Dr. Michael Vogel, who is a consultant at this time with the NWRPO, the Nuclear Waste Repository Project Office.
Right.
I usually have those two last ones mixed up. And Daryl always tells me, Daryl Lacey, who's in charge of that office, he says, no, didn't get it right again. But Dr. Vogel recently gave a presentation to our town board, and it was May 28th. And he is an expert on radioactive waste. You were the chief scientist for the Yucca Mountain Project, which I had the honor to work for quite a few years. And his presentation was called Issues Related to Transportation of Radioactive Waste Through Pahrump. We had a follow-up article in 2 newspapers on it, and Dr. Vogel would like to explain what we had learned from his presentation and what we had learned, some of the misinformation that was in the paper. There was a misprint, and you'd like to make a clarification on that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what's been happening and what's going to happen, we're envisioning may happen with this low-level waste. So I'm giving the program to Dr. Vogel.
Okay, well, when we talked to the town board, we started out with a briefing on hazardous material in general. And the purpose of that part of the briefing was to show the town board members that there's an awful lot of hazardous material being shipped, and a very, very small portion of it is actually radioactive material. That was what we were trying to do initially. Mm-hmm. And then we did a little bit of a highlight on the environmental impact statement that's just come out for the test site, the Nevada Nuclear Security Site. They're looking at, they have a low-level waste facility. Can we put that picture up now? Is it too late? Too early?
No, go ahead. You can put that up there. We can go to it.
Put the test site picture up, please.
The Nevada test site
Yeah,
itself?
the test site. That's a picture of the test site itself. It's sort of northeast of us here. It encompasses about 1,500 square miles, and in the lower right-hand corner is the base camp at Mercury. And just for reference, in the lower left-hand corner is where Yucca Mountain was located. Now, just north of Mercury, so we're still sort of in the southeast corner of that picture, is the test site's low-level waste facility.
Right.
And we actually have an aerial photo of the low-level waste facility that we can show you as well, that what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There we go. That's the low-level waste facility. That's permitted by the state, and it operates to receive low-level waste and hazardous waste, and the state of Nevada oversees that as well. So that's what we were talking about generally, this low-level waste facility. And we were talking about the environmental impact statement, which was projecting how many shipments of nuclear waste there could be coming to the Nevada test site. Now, what I said to the town board members was the EIS says that over a 10-year period, there could be as many as 25,000 shipments. And so that's the basis I said, okay, that comes out to be 2,500 a year. If you have 250 working days a year, that's about 10 shipments a day. Mm-hmm. Not all of that would come through Pahrump. Some of it could come through to the test site from other directions. But I think the important point, and I did not mention this when we were talking to the town board, was historically the average number of shipments coming through Pahrump of low-level waste to the test site is probably more like 800 a year as opposed to 2,500 a year.
Okay.
And at its peak, I think we looked that up, and it's probably about 1,500. There's reason to believe there would not be that many shipments in the future now that the Texas low-level waste facility is open and they're accepting DOE waste.
Right.
But the point we were trying to make is the environmental impact statement says there could be as many as 2,500 shipments per year in Nye County coming to the test site.
Okay.
Now, we have one more picture. We can show you what that looks like. There's a picture of the disposal operations in the low-level waste facility as well, showing a truck at the bottom being unloaded. That gives you an idea of what the waste shipments look like coming into the Nevada test site. They're typically in large metal containers or bagged up if it's concrete waste and so forth.
And there's items that may have been contaminated by radioactive material in the process of machining. I swear to God, I saw a flatbed truck with a metal lathe on it one time.
Oh, yeah, could have been. There's a difference that's kind of subtle. If it was Department of Defense related materials related to making weapons, that goes to the waste isolation pilot plant that's in New Mexico. If it's Department of Energy related waste, it comes here to the Nevada test site. Right. So you could have seen a lathe there very easily. I've seen quite a bit of that. But the important thing is that this is not leaking, dripping barrels of goo. These are solid wastes. Okay?
Let's make that very clear, because a lot of times what we have to put up with Yucca Mountain was the fear mongers that the cast that would be driving down the street, if they cracked open, they would be oozing a liquid type thing. But no, this is
we can jump. We actually have a picture of a Type B container that we were going to show you when we talked about the U-233 issue. We can look at it right now if you'd like to.
That one, okay.
Cam wants to look at the other one.
All right.
That's a Type B shipping container, and that is a container that's typically used for shipping high-level waste, spent nuclear fuel. And that particular container is designed to withstand being hit by a locomotive going 80 miles an hour, or having the truck run into a concrete wall and not lose its integrity. And it's not liquids inside there. It's ceramics and metals that are inside there.
And we had one of those out here for one of the fall festival parades, and I was running alongside of that. So we've seen that in town here.
We've seen one of those in town?
It might have been around 6-7 years ago. But,
well, you may have seen containers that look somewhat like that, maybe a little bit smaller. That was an actual Type B container for high-level waste. There are relatively high-level wastes that get shipped to the test site in very similar, strong, robust containers for disposal. Okay, so the issue we were talking about was the uranium-233 issue. And the situation is related to the cleanup of a DOE facility. And that's pretty normal. Most of the waste that's coming to the Nevada test site for disposal in the Area 5 disposal system is in fact waste that's generated in cleaning up DOE facilities. Now, the DOE can give you the statistics on this, but most of the waste from the cleanups of those facilities can be disposed locally. Relatively small part of it is shipped into the Nevada test site. So it's not like Nevada's getting all the waste from all the cleanup of the DOE sites. It's a relatively small portion of it. Typically, there aren't any questions about it. It's low-level waste. There's a document called the test site's waste acceptance criteria document, and that's a document that tells you whether or not waste can be accepted for disposal at the Nevada test site. And the question that came up about this uranium-233, this is being generated from the cleanup of Oak Ridge National Laboratories. This is the last remaining building they had at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory that they're trying to clean up. And what they're dealing with is a waste that came from an experimental program where they were looking at creating a different fuel that could be used in a reactor, or could have in fact been used for nuclear bombs. And those types of uraniums are called fissile uranium. They'll split apart and can actually have a chain reaction to them. Now, we've called this U-233. That's what DOE calls it. Just as a little bit of an aside, we'll do chemistry here for just a second. Atoms have typically protons, neutrons, and electrons. And it's the number of protons that dictates what the element is. So 92 is the number of protons in uranium, all right? Now, there's an equal number of electrons. Now, there also can be numbers of neutrons, and that's what makes the different isotopes of uranium. So when I say U-233 or U-235 or U-238, that's a change in the number of neutrons. It's still uranium, but it has a different number of neutrons. Most of the uranium that exists today is uranium-238, and that is not fissile. We can't make bombs out of that. We don't use that in nuclear reactors. We can separate from the uranium-238 an isotope called uranium-235, and that's the one that we can use in nuclear reactors because it'll split apart and generate heat. Okay, it's also the one we use in bombs. okay? And U-233 is another material they were trying to make to do the same thing, either use it in reactors or use it in bombs. They never did it, and they had this material stored at Oak Ridge. Now, they call this, the DOE calls this uranium-233. It's actually 75% uranium-235. So we're dealing with special nuclear material, fissile material. And the question that people like me are asking is that really low-level waste?
Okay.
And the DOE's argument is quite simply, it meets the test site's waste acceptance criteria, therefore we can bury it as low-level waste. Now, there's a reason that you want to question that. Why is that an issue? And it's an issue because going back to 1982, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission promulgated its rule on disposal of low-level waste. And then if you look in the Code of Federal Regulations, you'll find that in Part 10, CFR, Code of Regulations, Part 60, Federal Regulations, Part 61. That's the NRC's rule for how commercial low-level wastes are disposed.
Okay.
Now, the DOE is not subject to the NRC rules, but their waste acceptance criteria incorporates 10 CFR Part 61, the NRC's rule. All right, so they're treating it just like it was commercial waste. Now, why are the uranium isotopes not in the DOE's waste acceptance criteria? That's the heart of the question that we're talking about right now. They're not there because in 1982, when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was looking at coming up with a rule for disposal of low-level wastes, the waste generators were looking at the draft EIS and said, you're asking us to make measurements about isotopes that are not going to be in our waste streams. Right. We're not burying uranium, so don't ask us to measure the uranium in these waste streams because we're not burying uranium. Don't make us incur the costs of doing these extra tests when we're not going to find that in the waste stream. Right. That's why the uranium isotopes are not in the Part 61. That's why they're not in the DOE's waste acceptance criteria. Now, so DOE is correct. It meets our waste acceptance criteria. But you still have to question, is it suitable for shallow burial? The picture we showed you of the trenches at the test site, those are about 40 feet deep.
Right.
And we're talking about material that's not that much different from the type of material we were talking about at Yucca Mountain. That's required by the federal government to be disposed in deep geologic repositories.
Right.
So there's a disconnect here.
Yes.
Now, the DOE has responded to that question, and they've done a performance assessment to look at the longer-term performance of these materials. Low-level waste rules only require a 1,000-year performance assessment. Okay. The repositories require either 10,000 years or 1,000,000 years.
Million, right.
Okay, depending for Yucca Mountain.
Right.
And so DOE has done a calculation. They did not do a 1,000,000-year calculation. They did a calculation out to the time of peak dose. Okay. And that was about 500,000 years. For this, okay? The issue that we purists have is that they use current conditions. When we did comparable go ahead.
Right, and the current conditions will not remain in effect.
That's the argument. Right. That's why if this were classified as a material that required geologic disposal, which other special nuclear materials are, greater than Class C is required to do that.
And we're going to cut it right here, and we'll be right back in segment 2. There's a lot more coming at you.